What is the theoretically best path to advance through a one chunk at a time account? That's what I want to find out through this account. Welcome to the ideal OneChunkMan. This is episode 0 of the series. I'll be going over the rules and the explanations of what this account is, why this account exists, and in general what a chunkman is if you're unfamiliar. I am SourceChunk. This is my first venture into creating this type of video, but I have experience with the chunk community before this. I have a chunkman that was started about 2 years ago, and I have been playing on it on and off, but fairly actively for the past 2 years. It's one of the more advanced chunk accounts at this point, and I want to start a new chunkman, and with that, a brand new series of chunk accounts. So that's what this account is. So first I'll go over what a chunkman account is in the first place, just as a basis if you're unfamiliar with the concept of a chunkman. If you are, feel free to skip forward a few minutes. I'll leave a timestamp if you want. But if you're not familiar, I'd recommend listening because this is generally the whole point of the account. And if you don't understand this, then it'll be hard to, I think, keep up with what I'll be doing every episode because I'm going to be moving somewhat quickly. At the beginning I'll be slower, but I'm going to be moving quickly as we go, and I don't want anyone to feel lost during that. So, a normal chunk account is an account that is locked to a single chunk, which is a 64 by 64 square tile area. That the tiles are kind of walkable tiles. As you walk 1 square each. Those are walkable tiles. The reason these chunks exist are, I believe it has to do with the way that the game is coded. Outside of that, I can't say I'm too knowledgeable, but the first chunk man created by a guy named Puka Guy, who now goes by Alex Bailey, they started the Chunkman series on their YouTube about 2.5 years ago at this point, and community has kind of exploded from there since then. They created the account by seeing back then, RuneLite had a dev mode, and you could turn on these chunk borders, and they formulated this idea of kind of locking yourself to one chunk at a time as a snowflake Iron Man type of account, and theorizing that maybe there was a way to complete each chunk and then move to another chunk and kind of unlock the map in this weird but expanding way, rather than kind of at the time the hotness was kind of locking yourself to an area, aka Swampletics type of thing, or Karamja Ultimate Iron Man type of thing. So this was kind of interesting that you started smaller than those area locked things, but it kind of expanded as you went, and there was a more structure to achieving goals rather than just, I want to get this. It was now, I need to do this before I can leave this chunk. So let me go over what those goals per chunk were that you needed to complete, and that will need to be completing in this series, or if you're doing any chunk account that you'll need to be completing. So generally, I'm going to try this one more time and go through it a little bit quicker because I just listened back to what I recorded and it's way too long. So, different tasks per chunk. There are a couple categories. I'll start with the skilling category. These are tasks that require you to level up your skills to do something in that chunk. They generally make sense, but some of them are a little trickier. Let me just go through generally what it is, and I'll have a couple examples. So, generally, it's gathering tasks for gathering skills, processing tasks for processing skills, and then there's the weird ones here that don't really fit into a category. Usually it's wielding a weapon or armor, combat tasks, something like that, but mainly just gathering and processing the big ones. So for a gathering task, you need a primary way to train the skill, something like mining or fishing or woodcutting, you need a primary way to train that skill. And that means that you need access to any tools that you would need to train that skill at level 1, and you need the ability to train that skill at level 1 in a consistent way. So not through lamping, not through random events, has to be a way to train the skill. So for woodcutting, you need an axe at level 1, and you need trees that you can cut at level 1 that give XP. That's a primary way to train woodcutting. If you have a primary way to train a gathering skill, and you have a thing, an object in game, like a tree or a fishing spot that requires a higher level than you currently have, and you have a way to train that skill, then you need to train the skill to that level. So in the first chunk, we have a yew tree, we have a way to train woodcutting, we need 60 woodcutting. That's how gathering skills work. Processing skills work in a similar way, but there's some key differences. So processing skills, like smithing, crafting, that kind of thing, they also need a primary way to train that skill. In the sense of processing skills, that's a little bit different than gathering. Processing skills, for it to be a primary way to train this skill, it means you need primary source of items that you can process at level 1 and gain XP from. So something like crafting, a way to train at level 1 is spinning wool. Primary access to wool can be gotten from shearing sheep. That is a primary way because you are able to consistently replicate gathering the wool from the sheep every time. Something that's not primary would be killing goblins for a 1 in 50 drop of wool and then training crafting. So it's generally like that. Primary way to get an item, like buying it from a shop, picking it up from the ground because it's an item spawn. If it's a 100% drop from something, like bones or like dragon hide from a dragon, that's also primary. Or if it's an action that can be repeated and it gains it every time. So mining ore from a rock is primary, shearing wool from a sheep is primary, etc. Anything that's not like that is most likely going to be a secondary way to access an item. So the non-guaranteed drop from a monster, that's a secondary source. The only outliers there are something like random events, and those are kind of things that we don't consider at all. They're considered tertiary sources, but you can basically completely ignore them. So, back to processing skills. We need a primary way to train a skill. We'll take crafting again. We can shear sheep because we have a tool to shear the sheep with. We can have a primary access to that item. So we have a primary way to train crafting because we have primary access to the item, and we have a way to process it on the spinning wheel. When a processing task is initiated is also a little different than a gathering task, because gathering tasks you just need a thing to do. Processing tasks is usually combining items, like cutting a gem. That doesn't require any physical in-game object, it's just items in your inventory. Or in the case of spinning wool, it's got an in-game object like the spinning wheel, but it also has items in your inventory. So when is it triggered? So generally the way it works is processing tasks require you to process every item that you can within the chunks that you currently have at the lowest level possible that you can for each item. So what is the lowest level way to process a ball of wool? It's to spin it at a spinning wheel. That's it. What is the lowest level way for you to process a bronze bar if you have an anvil and a hammer? The lowest level way is to smith it into a bronze dagger. That's what would be required for smithing. It wouldn't be to make a bronze plate body. That's not the lowest level way to process a bronze bar. It's pretty straightforward in that sense. That's how it works for every skill that's a processing skill, including cooking, including something like herb lore. All that stuff is going to be lowest level way to process every item. Now, we don't have to actually process every item, we just have to process whatever happens to be the highest level out of all those items, and that's going to be our goal, but that's how you can think about it. So, in the first chunk, something like fletching, we have to process every item that we can through fletching at the lowest level possible for that item. So we can process normal logs, we can process oak logs, willow logs, and yew logs. Those are the things that we can process in the first chunk for fletching. The highest level thing is going to be the U-log, probably, and the lowest level way to process the U-log is at level 60. We can make them into arrow shafts. We do not have to make a longbow. We do not have to make a shield. Those are higher level. It's just the lowest level processing of any item. That's how it works. So, that's a processing task. I already explained gathering tasks. The last thing is just the miscellaneous stuff. Usually it's just wielding something. So in the first chunk, there's a mithril battle axe. Mithril items require 20 attack to wield. We need 20 attack as long as we have a way to train attack, which we can because we can just punch goblins or men or whatever. Pretty straightforward. There'll be miscellaneous stuff like that as we go, and I'll point them out if we ever run into them because they're less common. But I think they're pretty straightforward compared to some of the other stuff. So that's all of the skilling tasks. Another category is going to be best in the slot gear, and this is something that we need to get every chunk if there are upgrades to our gear. So this is for all 3 combat styles, melee, ranged, and magic, and there's also prayer bonus as a 4th. So you can basically think of it as 4 separate sets of gear that all need to be maxed out. And maxed out means attack bonuses and strength bonuses are good. And if we're tied on strength bonus and attack bonus, or if we have 0 in the case of most armor early on, then we're basing it off of defense bonuses. Just like how you would for normal best in the slot gear. Usually think of it as the strength boosting stuff, not the defensive stuff. So we need that for every combat style, and that is something that we'll need to get per chunk if it's an upgrade. So if we have a bronze helmet in the first chunk, a bronze med helm, that is going to be our best in slot melee helm most likely. If we go to a new chunk and there's a mithril full helm in the next chunk, we'll need to get that as our new best in slot for melee for the helmet. And it continues like that. It works like that for armor and weapons. Weapons are just calculated through a quick formula that gets their general power level basically, and we'll be using that to judge what the best in slot weapon is for all cases as well. Prayer bonus is just strictly prayer bonus, disregards everything else, so it doesn't matter if it's defensive or not, just counting out prayer bonus because when it's prayer boosting gear, you don't care about defense most of the time. You're just praying against whatever you're tanking. So yeah, that is best in slot gear basically. We do not count crafted best in slot gear. That's a common misconception. So crafting like dragonhide armor or smithing metal armor or weapons, that doesn't count. It's not chunk specific if we are processing stuff into armor. It's only chunk specific if we're getting that armor as a drop or buying it from a shop or picking it up from the ground. Okay? So that is best in slot gear. Next category of things is quests, and quests are pretty straightforward. Basically, we have to complete every quest, and we have to advance every quest as far as we can in our chunks for both of those. In the first chunk, there's lots of quests we can start. There are no quests that we complete though, so we're just advancing every quest as far as we can. And once we run into a step on a quest that we cannot do, either because we have to talk to an NPC on a chunk that is not the chunk that we're in, or any chunk that we have access to, or maybe there's an item that we need that is not attainable anywhere in our chunks, then that waits until the next chunk to be unlocked and until we can do it, basically, and once we can do it, we have to do it. Pretty straightforward. A similar thing that we have to worry about is diary tasks. So for achievement diaries, we have to complete them as we go, basically as soon as we can. The only caveat to that is that we don't have to do like elite diaries right away, because you don't get the rewards until you're able to do the easy, medium, and hards, and hards you can't get until you do the easy and mediums, so it works like that. So we have to do all the easy tasks that we can within our chunks until all the easy tasks for a certain diary are complete, and then for that diary we have to start working on the medium tasks until those are complete. So we don't have to worry about the super high level stuff until we unlock all the achievement diary stuff for the easy or the medium or whatever, And then we need to start worrying about that. And that's something that we'll need to pay attention to, because that could screw us over, because a lot of the achievement diaries are quite high level, actually. So, you heard at the beginning. What is the theoretically best path to advance through a one chunk at a time account? What does that mean exactly? How is that different than a normal chunk account that you just heard about? Let me explain. So, in normal chunk accounts, once you complete each chunk, you use a chunk picker website, or you do a random number generator of your own, and you pick a new chunk that is usually adjacent to one of your current chunks, randomly. And the way of doing this kind of leaves the game mode up to chance, and it's exciting when you're rolling a new chunk because you don't know what you're going to get. And I've done that. I have a chunk account that does exactly that, and I've made it quite far in that account. But doing all that got me thinking, what is the best way to do a chunk account? What's the best way to unlock each chunk? To unlock all the chunks? I mean, I know I can't choose my chunks, so I can't decide which way I'm going, but if I could, what's the best way to do it? Well, what about for this account? What if I could choose where I'm going? If I could choose where I'm going, maybe I could make the ideal path the best way for a chunk account to go. That's my goal in this series. I choose the next chunk that happens. I pick where this account goes, every chunk that we complete. I pick the next one. Will I make mistakes? Oh, most certainly. I will screw myself over many times in this account, because I don't know the answer. This is my attempt at exploring what that answer might be, but I'll definitely be wrong more than once during this account, and I'll put myself in some bad grinds accidentally. But that's part of what this account is, I think. But I think a concept like this is very interesting, and it's only been done like once before, as far as I'm aware. A guy by the name of Pelipper on YouTube. I'll put his link in the description so you can watch his series. He did, I think, a 15-episode series on this back a while ago, a year and a half to 2 years ago. And he did this, and I really liked watching that series. And unfortunately, he stopped it, but I think that the concept of it is very interesting. I'm not going to be following the same path as him at all. There might be similarities, but I'm not using his account as a guide in any way. I kind of want to explore this on my own. But yeah, it's a strong concept, and I'll have to credit him for coming up with that as a concept in general of picking your own chunks, because I think it's going to be a lot of fun doing it. So then finally, I just want to talk about why I want to do this account in the first place. I know I said it's going to be exciting and it's going to be interesting to kind of figure out this theoretically best path, but I also wanted to do this as a YouTube series because I think it'd be interesting to kind of have this as a record for people. People that are on the fence about doing this type of account, or just a chunk account in general. I think I want to show them that doing a chunk account isn't as hard as it might seem from watching your favorite creator do it. Especially if you watch someone like Limpwort who does the extreme chunk stuff. It seems hard, and I promise it's not. Doing his stuff is hard. It took him 2 years to get out of the first chunk. That's hard, but it doesn't have to be as hard as he makes it. What I'm doing here on this account, it's not hard. There are plenty of grinds, but you create them for yourself. You pick the chunks that you want, and none of them are unmanageable. I think that this is going to be an account that's a lot of fun, and I'm going to go through the series explaining what I'm doing and explaining how I'm doing it as well. Not just from a gameplay point of view, but also from a technical point of view on the chunk side. So I'll be explaining a lot about the plugin that I'm using and the websites that I'm using. The plugin that I use, just for reference, is the Region Locker plugin on RuneLite. You go to the plugin hub and type in Region Locker. It's by Slay to Stay. Great dude. He's made an excellent plugin. I would highly, highly recommend using it if you're doing any kind of chunk account or even a chunk-based account. And the website that I use for the chunk picking and keeping track of my tasks per chunk is Chunk Picker V2. It's a website that I've created myself. It's a website that the rest of the community uses as well, so I'm not just using this to promote my website because everyone in the community basically already uses it. But I want to use this series to kind of demonstrate maybe how to use some of the features that are less used and make it less intimidating for people that look at it and just see all these little bits and bobs and everything and get kind of overwhelmed by it. It's more straightforward than you think it is. That's what I want to say. And going through this series, I'll talk about the decisions that I make. I'll talk about the way that I'm setting up things. I'll talk about how I'm doing all this, and you can follow along if you want to, or use this as a guide to set up your own account or your own series if you want to make it a series too. But yeah, I'll get more into that in episode 1. I'll be setting up my map and everything and talking generally about what I'm doing, and I'll probably recap what I go over in this video, but I just wanted this video to stand as a way to kind of mark what I'm doing in this account and why I'm doing it, so there's not confusion. I can point to this video as like if you don't understand what's going on, this video does a better job explaining it than I ever could on the fly. So yeah, really excited for this series, and I hope you'll join me in episode 1. I would say you have to wait for it, but episode 1 should be out right now. I'll be releasing episode 0 and episode 1 together, so go check that out right away. See how it is. If you like it, stick around. There's going to be more episodes coming, hopefully quickly, although it's always dependent on how quickly I can do the goals of each chunk, but I'm hoping to get them out relatively quickly and be able to provide entertainment and some guidance, like I said. So I will see you guys in that episode right now.